Okay, this is me recording a video of what will be a scenario of up front. It's going to be the rear guard action scenario up front. That would have been a better intro, wouldn't it? But I'm tired of takes. I've been given an iPhone 7 by a cousin from America. They got a new phone, and it's really weird in that on the video recording ability, there's no ability to pause. Compared to my Android, it's great. You've got a great zoom function. I can zoom all the way to 6 times and show you the scenario that I'm going to be playing, rear guard action here. But it's a bit grainy, isn't it? Sorry, it's wobbly because I've got a strange boom. Anyway, for my setup. But the really strange thing is there's no pause function. Why did they consider doing a video recording function without a pause? Everybody's going to want that. So I downloaded an app, which really you would need to pay for. I didn't find any free ones. This one was sort of free up front, but really to get the benefit of it, you needed to pay for it. It slapped a watermark on it. I'm going to zoom in on this, so at least you've got something to read if you don't want to listen to me rambling on. I'm only about my iPhone woes. But anyway, that app wouldn't let you zoom, so you could pause, but then the zoom function was disabled, so I found another app. That app lets you pause, that's what it was for. It also let you zoom, but then if I don't touch the screen within a minute and a half, it just it goes dark another minute and a half and it turns itself off, or else it pauses. Been searching through iPhone trying to work out how I could disable that, but I think it's related to the app. Ridiculous. I don't get it. I mean, I also don't get it in war games. The strange thing where you produce something that is obviously got problems that why would you release it? Anyway, so the trouble is this is going to be I can't pause, and without really tiresome editing of whenever someone phones and phones me and the recording's turned off, etc. And I can't, but most of all, I won't be able to pause to check the rule book, so I'm sorry about that. That was my real intention, because I'm familiarising myself with upfront again. I know the basics, but it's such a sort of different from what there's many sort of different concepts that often you need to check again your understanding of the concepts. But anyway, let's get on with it. So what do we have? These are the Germans of the attackers. I can't remember what I've always said. This is about the 7th or 8th take I've tried with this. The Germans are attacking. Their intention is that the Americans are a rear guard group. So the Germans essentially have to get as close as possible, what's called a relative range 5, to one of the rear guard groups with at least 5 of their personalities. And up front, each scenario is generally, you have 10, 12, 14 personalities. That's basically a squad against another squad. In this one, there's an extra asset, this mortar. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13. So essentially there's 12 men that could go forward, but I'm probably going to have one staying back to help crew the mortar, or else it's not as effective as it might be. So there's 11 men going forward, and 5 of them have to get within relative range of 5 as close as possible to one of the rear guard groups. The rear guard groups can move back. It's not as easy as just moving forward. A fight and retreat, we all know, is a difficult thing. And the Americans have 6, 8, 10 fellows, but they just have to have to stop the Germans. The other thing, the way the Germans could win, is if the Americans have less you can reduce the defending player to one group. So if the Germans are divided into two groups, if the Americans are divided into two groups, if the German eliminates one group, they have won as well. Effectively, the rear guards would be annulled. So the Americans are trying to stop that now. According to the counters flying everywhere. So okay. According to the scenario rules, now these indicate the personality cards we're doing. We could have had the Germans as the rear guard and the Americans attacking, but the Russians could have been one of the sides. But so these determine the personality cards. The attacker goes first. We'll run through 3 decks. So if the Germans don't achieve their objective before, then the Americans have also won. And then some scenario-specific rules there. So what I'm going to do is set up we've got the opposing squads, now we set them up into what's called groups, or fire teams you might call them, using modern parlance. So essentially one thing you want to sort of check is the weapon the fellow has and his morale. For example, if you want fellows to move forwards and fight effectively, especially at close ranges, they need to be high morale. So because the mortar's probably going to be sitting far back, in fact I think I'm going to have it as the middle group. No, I'm going to have it as a far group. It's probably not going to be attacked, so I'm going to put this lowest morale fellow. He's going to be crewing, so I put a crew symbol there to cover up his firepower to remind me he's crewing. He won't be using his bolt action rifle. I'll do a close-up a bit later when I've sort of just shown you how you start the game. So then we have a light machine gun. We have 4 machine pistols, and then all the other fellows have bolt action rifles. This guy is actually indicated as the assistant squad leader, and so is this. So we don't have a squad leader marked on the card, so we would choose one of these. These guys are actually exactly the same characteristics, but oddly they're different points values. I guess it determines their reverse side. The values are actually the same. I think that might be a mistake. That might be meant to be squad leader. So okay, so he's going to be our squad leader. And so then the question is, we're going to have a manoeuvre group and a fire group. You generally have 2 or 3 groups, sometimes 4, but quite rarely. If you have armoured fighting vehicles, that fighting vehicle will be a group on its own. So that's when you start getting sort of more than 2 or 3 groups into play most commonly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have hopefully a fast manoeuvre group with machine pistols for close action fighting if necessary, and then we'll have the fire group here with more bolt action rifle action. Now that group needs to be at least 5. The intention is this group's going to move forwards. That will be the 5 personalities that we need to gain the win at relative range 5, close quarters. So I'm going to add an extra personality, make it up to 6 in case one dies on the way. And the rest of these we put here to indicate that these are in a group together. And this light machine gun also needs to be crewed, and I'm going to crew it with a fairly high morale power fellow there, so there's a good chance that can keep firing. Again, this can be fired by a single person, but it's not quite as effective. Now, on the American side, so, oh, hang on, I need assistant squad leader in a separate group from the squad leader. Okay, so I'm actually going to pass one of these guys over. So now we've got 3 Mausers, bolt action rifles, and 3 machine pistols there. And the assistant squad leader is going to come into here, and he will crew, because he's not going to be able to use his machine pistol at long ranges. So he's going to crew. Can you hear a cat there? We recently got 2 kittens, and I've shut them out, so they're getting bored, I think. I was surprised how much attention kittens seem to want. I thought cats were independent creatures, but these ones seem to wait for us. Okay. I don't want to let them in because I know they're going to want to jump up on here where the action is. Okay. So this is what the Americans have. 2 fellows with carbines. These ones are semi-automatic rifles, the M1 Garand. There's a fellow with a Thompson machine gun there, and a fellow here with a BAR, BAR, M19, etc. Squad leader here, assistant squad leader here. So I think I'm just going to put them in 2 groups. The thing is, if we have 3 groups, it kind of dilutes what you can use. Dilutes the use of your hand, because you have a fixed hand of cards. If I have 6 cards as the Americans and 3 groups, and in that hand I might only have 2 fire cards, so one group won't get to fire. I might get, on the other hand, you might say, well, get a 3rd group, because then it gives 2 groups for the Germans that have to knock them. They have to not the Americans, one of which conditions knock them down to 1 group, isn't it? But then also, if you have a small group, it doesn't have much firepower. The Americans don't really need to move with them and so forth, so it'd be better for them to clump together somewhat, but not just in 1 group, because then the Americans already have one. I think you might have to have 2 or more groups with a minimum of 2 personalities in each group. If it's just 1, as I said. So squad leader, assistant squad leader in each group. So one group's going to have the bar, and essentially my thought is that these groups both need to be fairly equal, because we're not going to have a fire manoeuvre element, because I'm not aiming for an aggressive defence like that. They're aiming more to move back if they have to, and they're both going to be targets, so I don't want sort of a group that is weaker firepower that becomes a major target. The other consideration is where the Germans put this. So you have groups A, B and C, and now if the Americans have 2 groups, let's just say groups A and B, A has to be opposite this A, and the American B has to be opposite the German B. So no one can go opposite C. You can't, for example, say, okay, I'm going to leave a gap in the middle. This one's going to be A and this one's C. No, you can't do it. So what that essentially means, and it's the conceptual space determines that this group C is the flanking group. B is adjacent to it, but it's opposite B. And so this one, A is not adjacent to C, it's adjacent to B. So this group is at further range away from this one than group B is to this one. and so this one doesn't have a group directly opposite it as well, so it can move around and flank. Now I can't remember exactly, but you can, once the firefight is started, you can move fellows out. You could start another group here, so you might have a group C to kind of try and block at any flanking attempt. Sacrifice a couple of individuals for that perhaps, but it's not a done deal. You need movement cards and so forth, and you might end up, say you want 2 guys to peel off, you might end up with one getting there, one tries and he's knocked back, and so this guy's on his own. This guy takes a while to come up, and things are happening. So it essentially, what it does is it allows the attacker to set the scene. This guy at group C is going to be the flanking group, and the Americans could try and meet it, but then they are spreading themselves out rather thin. Now if instead I had put the mortar over in group C, then there would be no flanking group as such. We would just have A versus B, and B versus A versus A, B versus B, like A and B, and then this one over here on its own with no one against it. So it would be kind of like hanging out on a limb at wasted space, and also it would be further to fire on here. I was considering putting the mortar here, but what I don't really see a benefit in that, because even here it's adjacent to both, it's opposite or adjacent to both A and B, and that gives the same range to both. So putting it here doesn't change that, but what it does mean is that this maneuver group, it could sort of be cut off if the Americans advance and take out the mortar. I think that's going to disadvantage. I'm not quite sure. I'm more working on my sort of intuition, which knows some of the rules better than I do. Sort of remembering how it goes out. I can't sort of recollect it all to the forefront of my mind, but something's telling me that putting this here is going to be a greater benefit. We've got the fire group here, and then this one's freer to move out, and this does its job just as well as it would do in the middle. What this kind of does to me is that it says this fellow's now going to have to concentrate on him, he's going to have to concentrate on him, and that's going to be free. If that was in the middle, then they might kind of leave, then it might be that this fellow concentrates on the manoeuvre group, and this fellow's could equally sort of, at least psychologically, concentrate on either of these, and I want the mortar to be left alone. Because there's no guarantee it's going to be in decent terrain, plus I'm probably going to move it up to get a bit closer so it gets a better to hit chance, because at the moment everybody's at kind of their first opening range. Okay, so that is the German set. I haven't done the Americans yet, have I? I was chit-chatting. So squad leader there, so I was just trying to divide it just for the sake of it. So I'm trying to give equal sort of morale and firepower to each side here. Okay, so we've got morale 5, 4, 5 and 4. Morale. So I put the carbine in there. No, perhaps a second carbine there. Rifle there. Then we got 2 and 2. Okay, that's 5 fellows in each group, and I'll just check the firepower. So at range 2, 7 firepower, and at range 2 here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, no, it doesn't pan out. So this is high power. I think one of the groups just going to basically have to be heavier firepower, and I'm going to put them in group B to be concentrating on that what's probably going to be the manoeuvre group. Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I don't want to make them smaller number. Just checking I've got the right number because the cats have been here. Set this out a while ago and it scattered some cards. You might have lost one. So the Americans, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah. Okay, so that's going to have to be them. Okay, it doesn't really matter the order they're in, but the order does matter. There's just, like, you sometimes get random position checks. So, for example, a sniper attack targeting this group would randomly target one of the fellows. It is important if you're crewing, the crews have to be next to each other. Okay. Actually, I'm going to swap over the carbine here so we get more firepower at longer range on this group, because if they do start moving, which I'm sure they will quite soon, we want to get firepower on them. The carbine doesn't have quite as much range as the Garand bolt action rifle. Okay, so that's how we set up. We've got squad leader here, assistant squad leader here, assistant squad leader here, and the mortar team there. And we're ready to go. I'll put these out the way, but in my close by in case I need them. And then we deal with the first hands. So yes, and this is what I'm going to have to do actually, is move these fellows down because of my space constraint. I need enough space to put cards, 2 rows of cards up here. So this is going to be the German hand one, and this is going to be the American hand. And the Germans always have 5 cards in their hand, and the Americans get 6. But the Germans have a slightly better cycling through. The Americans can either take actions or discard, and sometimes you find you don't have cards to take many actions, or you'd only take 1 action. And so if you don't discard, you don't get to cycle through and get, you know, the cards that you want turning up. So the Americans have a choice either to act or discard. They get to discard 2 though. The Germans, on the other hand, they can always discard 1. So even if one of their groups takes an action, they get to discard. I'm just going to offset that one back, just because it's probably going to be further back. So let me check. You can see that on video. Yes. You don't actually need to see that. Okay, so we've got the German hand, the American hand. Oh, we still haven't started, we're still in the setup, because what happens next is the attacker goes first and they can start playing terrain on themselves or their opponent. Interesting, the only terrain we've got is brush, brush and brush. You can always tell what card is a terrain card because it has a coloured picture on it. So I'm going to put this in the brush, so it's got some protective terrain already. That's the mortar. I'm going to put these fellows in the brush, so they've got some protective terrain already. No, I'm going to put these fellows in it, but they're going to start moving as soon as possible. Oh no, sorry. So the Germans will place 1, then the Americans get to place 1. Now you could place a card on the opponent, but for example, streams or marshes, which is not good terrain to find yourself in. The American doesn't have any, so he's just going to gain himself a little bit of protection. And we would continue doing this as long as either side has terrain cards. But that's it in this situation. And so we replenish hands. Okay, so now we start. So the Germans go first. This is their hand. This group's in brush. Everybody's at range chit 0. So I said I was going to zoom in, wasn't I? I don't know really what to show. These. See the assistant squad leader there. ASL. This indicates the range. So we have, let's go out a bit. So this is Group B. They're at range. Oh, that's to indicate he's crewing the light machine gun. So we got range here. So at range chit 0, these are the range chits. Let me zoom out a bit. Okay, this is a range chit and this is a range chit. Everyone's at 0 to start with. The groups that are opposite each other or adjacent, you work out what's called their relative range by summing the totals together. So what will happen is this group will play a movement card and move forward. So they will go to range chit 1, like that. Which now means that that 1 plus that 0 are now sum up to 1. So these two groups are now at relative range 1 to each other. These will be adjacent as well, so it's the same. If there was a third group here, it would be relative range 1 less, so it would still be at 0 to this group. Now, if this fellow moves forwards, for example, that's a 1, that's 1. So now they're at relative range 2. So as the relative range increases, the actual distance between them has decreased. And because of that, this range here is the relative range. It's not just the range chit. So if the relative range is 0, which we are at the start, there's no firepower. The bolt action rifle's too far away. At relative range 2, for example, it's 1. And you can see how it increases up to firepower of 3 at relative range 5. If we look across at the light machine gun, it's got firepower of 4, even at this extreme range. If it wasn't crewed, so if he was using his machine pistol, you usually use the bracketed number, so it would be 2. So it's still got some firepower, but not quite as much as if there's a crewman. So he's crewing, he's not using his machine pistol. Otherwise, you can see the machine pistol only comes into effectiveness at relative range of 3, relatively close to the other fellows. I'll just take a quick look to introduce the ordnance. So this is the mortar over here. Now that has the number there is 0, so you might think that's not doing anything, but that's actually a 2-hit number. It's not firepower. So when you draw cards, action cards, you have a number at the top here. That's for the random number check. If I'm trying to hit on a 0 and I draw this card, then I did get a hit. Some are red, some are black, and that can affect things, but normally you're just worried about the number. So that's actually a hit. If, for example, I drew, oh look, there's another 0. Let's say if I drew this card, that's a 2 for the random number check. That's not going to be a hit with the mortar at relative range of 0. Okay. So I'm not really going to sort of use this as an instructional, it's more just going to be a playthrough, but I think I will sort of mention bits and bobs here and there for those that haven't played the game before. Okay, so where were we? Yeah, so that's set up. So they're in brush, they're in brush, they're in brush, and it's the German goat. They have no movement cards, all fire cards. And what that means, any fire card can be used to fire the mortar. That's what they're going to do. So they're going to spend a fire card, and then they look for that random number. We know, because I put them back in order, that's a 0. And I didn't set that up before the game, so we know that's going to be a hit, and I'm going to pop it on this group. It would equally be a hit on this group, but they have some protection. Just to start with, I'm going to pop it on this group. No, I'm going to pop it on this group because we want some to help the maneuver group. So first thing I do before I forget is to change this to, so it's going to be +1 to hit because we're targeting them now, getting the range on them. So next time, then we check the card and see, look, okay, so we got the hit. Now this is the factors of fire, the fire factors that we're going to use. So we start with a base 2 and we compare that to the American squad here, or the group. We compare that to their, if you can see at the bottom, you have a morale rating. So this guy's morale is 5. You can't see that. This is 4, 3, 3 and 1. So because the 2 from the mortar is already higher from the 1, that guy at the end, who you can't quite see there, is probably going to be pinned by it. And there's also a KIA number here of 8, and it's the same for everyone, it's always 8. So if that number of 2 from the mortar plus this random number check equals 8, they're killed. If it's equal to or higher than their morale, they are pinned. So the first fellow, the squad leader who we check, that's 2 minus 1 because it's in brush, so we start with a 1. Plus 0 is 1, so he's fine. So we have 1 plus 2 is 3, he's morale of 4, so he's fine. 1 plus 0 is 1, he's morale of 3, he's fine. Now, because it's red, in this instance you will subtract that, so we start with base 1 minus 4, so minus 3, he's morale of 3, he's fine. And then finally the last guy, so we start with 1 plus 1 is 2, his morale is 1, so he is pinned. What that means is until he's rallied, he has a panic value, his morale is replaced by a panic value. If he gets another hit equal to or above his panic value, he's out of the game, he's panicked, out of the firefight, and he's no use. He could also be killed. It increases to 9 now, he's pinned, he's ducking down. But the point being that you want to rally your guys because it's kind of like two strikes and you're out. So you don't want, you want to refresh them back to sort of fresh side, not pinned, because they're liable to be eliminated from the game that way. Okay, so that was the mortar firing. Each group can only take one action, so have one card played or some other kind of action. If there's a few more possible in a turn. So these could fire, but if it's not an ordnance, what we do is we take the fire card, and you see that we have to get enough firepower. You remember at the range we check the firepower from that group to satisfy that number. If we get that, then we start with a base of 2, which you then factor against terrain and the random number checks. So that's quite a low fire card, which is, you get high ones like this, you need 14 firepower total in the group. So you're only going to be able to be using that one when you're at a relative range of 3, 4, 5, very close to the opponent. But then you get more fire factors coming out of it. So this 3 can be immediately satisfied by the 4 firepower at range 0 of that light machine gun. So this group can play that fire card, and they're again going to play it on this group. These other 2 fire cards, we don't have enough firepower from them to use it, so they won't be useful. Now, one thing which I didn't do against the mortar is the Americans actually have a concealment card here. Some cards are twin use. This star indicates you could use this as a movement card for the Russians. So the action deck, apart from these personalities being tailored to the nationalities, the action deck itself is tailored also to the nationalities. For example, the Russians get more movement. In this case, they can use it as a concealed card as well, which gives a -1 benefit against the fire factors. But often you get less concealment and more movement use for the Russians, as considering it as one of their nationality traits. So the Americans can play that. So that fire factor comes down to 1 because of the -1 from the concealed card and -1 from the brush. So we start at a base of 0. Now at this point the German can decide, are you going to continue with a shot? Point being is that I'm going to spend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards to check. Now that means the deck is burning through 5 cards, and as we know, that is also the timer. So does the German have enough time to keep sending suppressive fire here? At this point in the game, yes, they do. So we're on base 0. 0 -1 +2 -1 +3. So that's actually hit his panic number, and he is out of the game, panicked out of the game. Sometimes it makes a difference if they to victory calculations if they're panicked out of the game or killed out of the game, but either way it's eliminated. In this case it doesn't matter. So one thing I didn't make note of for you is that the random numbers go all the way from 0 to 6, and they can be red. In this case that will be used as a minus. If you get a red 6, then you can have malfunctions. It's a bit a red 5 or 6 in the case of the mortar. But I think that the spread is that there's less 6s than 0s. I think there's more 0s, that medium range, as it were, if you consider +6 to -6 with 0 in the middle. Okay, so that was some good shooting, initial shooting. Mortar attack, machine gun fire have actually killed one of the Americans. They were a bit unfortunate, they didn't get some decent terrain. So the Germans, their last thing they can do is discard a card, as they always can, which now means, seeing they played 2, they get to replenish their hand with 3 cards, which is great. And they've got a movement, and they've got some nice terrain they can move into in later turns. But now we go to the Americans. They're down 1 card because they used it for concealment, but that's fine. They have a wire card. They can play this, which is going to sort of tangle up one of the German squads, but they can only do that if they discard. So you see, that's another benefit of the Germans, is that they can always place these wires and sniper cards, which only happen as a discard. The American cannot take any other actions if he's going to use a sniper or a wire card, but he does get to discard 2 when he does that, so that's a good thing. This card is available as smoke for the American. It's not really a benefit for him now because he doesn't need to hide in smoke. Not at this point. He's not sort of too threatened. Okay, this bit's smaller than he wanted, but no, 1 man down. but they want to be firing out. That's the point. You don't want to put smoke on yourself, so you can't see. So he's got one fire card, but not enough firepower possible. So he's going to discard that and the wire. And he's going to put the wire down. I think he's going to try and take out a machine gun. He's going to put the wire down on them. Might be wise to put it on this one, but I made that decision. And I'm not, obviously, because I'm not able to pause, I'm not going to spend a lot of time thinking, or else it could get quite boring for any viewers. Okay, so that's the American turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards. Oh, it's got a hero now. The heroes are quite helpful. No, so the Germans got a movement card which they want. They could put it here to remove the wire, because at the moment this wire, you have to take these things as kind of with a pinch of salt, as it were, or a sort of breadth of imagination that's doesn't necessarily literally is wire that suddenly they have tangled themselves in. It can represent some other problem that means it's, at the moment, it's easier to fire on them. You get benefit firing on this, they get a detriment of firing out. So you can rationalise it any way you want. That is the effect. That doesn't mean that it's a completely abstract card game, as I was talking about at the beginning of this video. Being able to rationalise it as wire or some such makes the game make sense in a way it wouldn't otherwise. So we could play that to get rid of that, or we play it to move these fellows up. And I'm going to cheekily use that. So he's changes his range from 0 to 1. So now they're relative range 1 closer. So they're both closer to each other, obviously. And he's moving in the brush. The brush still counts, but they're moving out of it. So now there's a benefit firing against them because of that. We've got a firepower card here. A fire card. I don't have enough firepower for it. So I'm going to discard it. And that is the end of the German turn. So the American turn, they're looking for a fire card. Now what we have here, interestingly, the hero can double firepower. So for example, the bar at relative range 1 is 3 firepower. So if I played the hero card, that would go up to 6. And then I get 7 and 8 from the 2 semi-automatics, but that's still not enough to play this 16 firepower requirement on this fire card, so doesn't help. I think we're just going to have to cycle through cards. We don't need movement, and we don't really need that card at the moment, so the American just is looking for an opportunity. Back to the German, so they are fortunate, but they might not be fortunate for long. So they're going to jump into the hills. So once you've placed the terrain on top of a movement, all other movement and terrain below it disappears. They've made their move, so they're now on a hill. I'm going to save that movement to move them again, and still playing it risky with this fellow. No, not. I'll play that movement to get rid of the wire. Okay. So there's no change of on the range shit for that. It's just annulling sort of some guys coming out to move the obstacle or sort out whatever the problem was. Okay, back to the Americans. They still haven't got... Oh yes, they have a fire card here. It's not great, but it's something. So they're going to play that Yeah. In fact, they're going to play it on here, the light machine gun. Okay. No, they want to concentrate here. Okay, so what that means is we have they satisfied the firepower requirements. We have 2 against these fellows on the hill. That's going to be -1. So we're on a base 1. The Germans have a concealment that brings -1. That brings it down to base 0. Okay, so we have 0 plus 3. He's pinned. 0 minus 3. He's okay. 0 minus 3. He's okay. 0 minus 5. Okay. 0 minus 1, and then 0 plus 3, he's 4, he's the squad leader, so he's okay. So that pinned 1 man. And that is the end of the American turn, unless... could do a sideways movement, just to get the card out of our hand. Now, I'm checking the rules, but I don't want to spend too much time doing it. Yeah, you can move laterally. Okay, without actually transferring anything, so we can always do that. So the trouble is that it does leave them a bit open to fire, but it gets the card out of the hand. I'm going to take that risk. Oh, it's replaced with another movement card. Okay, so that was probably unwise. Never mind. So back to the Germans. What do they have? They need movement, they don't have it. They do have a rally 1, so they're rallying that fellow. And they're going to fire the mortar on here. But then they'll lose the +1 to hit, so even though those are moving, they're going to continue against this fellows. So I need a 0 or 1 to hit, and I got a 0. Okay, so that's 2 minus 1's from 1, minus 3, minus 0, minus 5, minus 1, no dice. That was a bit unfortunate. Okay, and then the Germans could discard, but they're actually going to hang on to that woods. They get 3 cards. Maybe they should have discarded an extra. Okay, the Americans, they have no fire cards, but what they can do, so they can place one of these on top of that movement. It counts as open terrain. Yeah, that's poor. Oh well, they're just going to get 1 card back. Back over to the Germans. They need movement, which they don't have. They do have a fire card here they could use. Okay, so this group is going to fire on these fellows with the base 0. +1, 0 minus 1, 0 minus 2, 0 minus 0. So again, no effect. Perhaps I'm wasting these shots. This one's going to be the mortar, and it missed. Okay, and are they going to discard? They're going to discard one of those rallying cards, and they do get a movement for their pains. Okay, back to the Americans. they're just going to discard. No, they're actually gonna. These fellows are going to move again. They're going to be moving into woods. Now that they've got a decent terrain card. Okay. And back to the Germans. So the Germans have got movement. They're going to move forward there. So this ranged ship becomes 2 now. So they're getting closer. Any other card they can play? No, they'll just discard that hell card. And over to the Americans. Now, one thing I've forgotten to be doing is checking how many buildings cards we've used, because once 4 have been uncovered, the rest actually count as buildings. There's only 2 in there so far, so I'm using these little markers here to remind me. So 2 building cards have come out. Okay, so the Americans, yeah, so fortunately he didn't get any fire down on him. He's jumping into those woods. And this fellow, any fire we've got there? No. That's all. Okay. So these guys jump into these woods, slowly, incrementally moving forwards. The mortar, take a pot shot at these fellows, missed, and they're going to discard the Rally 2 card. Okay, over to the Americans. They're just going to discard because they want fire cards. Back to the Germans, they want movement. There's some smoke, now that's going to help with movement, so they're going to drop smoke there. These guys are still out in the open, which isn't a very good situation, but we haven't had that many movement cards to sort that out. Okay, and they're going to fire on these fellows, and so we're on flat firepower of 0, -2, that's a -2. I think we're not going to take that shot, so just going to replenish our hands and with 2 cards. Okay, so over to the Americans. They are, this card's a coward for the Americans, it's a dead card essentially. So they're just discarding. Germans got the movement they wanted. So now we've got accumulation here, but the woods still count. So they're moving through woods, so it's -2, +1, and then -1 because of the smoke cover they've put out. So there'll be a net -2 cover modifier for any fire upon them, which is nice. I must remember to change the range shit up to 3. So you can see they're getting close. They could win the game quite quickly unless the Americans can answer it. They've got a fire card here, so I'm going to fire again. And that's going to use up that concealment, so we're down to -1, and again we're going to refuse. No, we're going to risk it. So we're on 2, -1, -1. Okay, so it's base 0 +5. So the squad leader is pinned. Base 0 +1. Another buildings card comes out. He's okay. 0 -2. 0 -4. Okay, so we pinned the squad leader. That's nice. What that means is that the because the squad leader's out of action, the American can only have a hand size of 5 instead of 6 while their squad leader is pinned. They wouldn't discard to bring them down to 5, but they couldn't draw back up to 6. And then the Germans could discard a card, but I think they're going to keep those. They get buildings. That's the last buildings card. So now, to satisfy the special scenario conditions, so now all buildings cards count as buildings, or some such likely cover that's heavy cover essentially. And so I replaced that one in the German hand. Okay. So the American has a fire card. They need to rally here. They could use the hero, but what we have is a situation, so they could either rally or fire. You couldn't do both actions. I'm just checking what firepower we have. So at range 0 and 3, relative range of 3. The bar gives us firepower of 4, and the grand's 2 each, so that gives us 8. This card needs 9, and this card needs 12. If I use the hero, that 4 goes up to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I could use this 5 fire factor card. We're going to do that. Leave the squad leader. But this is the threat, and we're going to take that risk to rally him later. Or, no, yeah, because you can either use this to rally one at any time as a bonus action on top of any other action, or you can use it to double the firepower in the same way. And I need that firepower because I don't quite have enough of that, and I want to fire on them. And I'm hoping that the Germans don't have fire cards. Okay, they're looking for movement, so they probably have been discarding their fire cards as we saw. So we'll take that risk. So we're going to use that 5 firepower. You're spending our hero, so he essentially stands up or something to get a clear shot. What a hero! And that is a massive amount of fire factors upon. So we know that there's a net -2, so that brings that 5 down to 3. So we're starting with 3. Do they have any concealment? That, yes, but that only works for the Russians, so no. So we're starting on a 3. -3, okay. 3 minus 4. 3 minus 0 is 3, but he's morale 5, so he's okay. 3 plus 1 is 4, he's morale 2, so he's pinned. 3 plus 1, he's morale 2, also, so he's pinned. 3 plus 0, he's morale 4, the squad leader, so he's alright. So that pins. That's heavy fire, but into smoke and the woods on those moving targets. So the Americans, can these guys fire? They are adjacent. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 firepower. Ah, that's actually enough. So there's another fire attack. Okay, so it was 4 minus 2, so we're on 2 again. Well, the other one's 3, wasn't it? So 2 plus 2 is 4, pinned. 2 plus 1 is 3, he's okay. 2 plus 0, 2 plus 2, he's panicked away. So that's 1 on each side. 2 plus 0, he's 2 for panic, so he's panicked away too. 2 plus 1 is 3, so the squad leader's okay, and that is it. That's disastrous, because now that team is that group is too small to satisfy the victory condition which they were relying on. Unfortunate. Excellent fire from the Americans, but with the squad leader still pins, they only go up to a hand of 5. What can the Germans do in reply? They are cussing, so this firepower is very weak now. 1, they can muster 5. They've lost 2 guys, 2 of their machine pistols. Yeah, okay. It was probably my fault for putting low morale guys in the manoeuvre team. Because really, I did it so that the machine pistols were there so they could put down a heavy base of fire when they were up close, but really all they needed to do was manoeuvre. I thought they might need to fire at some point to sort of pin the group they were up against, but really I should have concentrated on the manoeuvre and put some higher morale guys with less up close firepower. Still, I only really had one choice, so anyway, what do we have? I mean, an option would have been even for the machine gunner to be in that group, so when you can't move and fire at full firepower, but you could have fired at lesser firepower. So I'm cutting because that's going to make it, we're over halfway through the first deck. Germans were looking for getting close, but you know, it all hangs in the balance. They're still at relative range of 3. They needed to get to 5. Anything could have happened in between. I was counting my chickens before they were hatched, is what I was doing. So we're over to the Germans. What can they do? They need to rally. But before that, they're going to jump into these woods. I think I removed that smoke. Yeah, because they've moved out of that. And I think what I'm going to do is stop the action here. I'll just finish this turn because that video is an hour long so far, just over, so it's quite long enough. So even with a pinned guy, they're not actually moving because they already had a movement card. They can jump into terrain with it. You couldn't play another movement card with a pinned fellow in your group. The mortar onto these fellows. Do we get a hit? No. Okay. And is there going to be a discard? Yep. Okay. So that is the end of the German turn. And that is where we stand. The guys, the squad leader pinned down, mightily impressed by what his other guys did.